Welcome to the Take the North podcast. I'm David Haugh from the Mully and Haugh Show. Dan Wiederer is from the Chicago Tribune covering the Bears down in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine. And we are talking about Caleb Williams because he met the NFL media on Friday morning. And Dan, I think that if Caleb Williams had hopes that he would be able to win the day, I think that he could walk away from the podium feeling like he won the day. I felt like he was pretty impressive. You were there. I only watched and heard. What was your overall takeaway?
Yeah, well, I'll set the scene for you because I left my hotel here in Indianapolis before sunrise to get over to the convention center, understanding that today was the day where you were going to get a whole handful of the top prospects in this draft finally meeting the media. And that's all the offensive skills players. It's the quarterbacks, 4 of them, the receivers, 3 of them, turned out to be 2 because Marvin Harrison Jr. did not do his interview session. But it was really interesting to see the assembled media gathering almost 2 hours before Caleb Williams took the stage there. And when he finally did get on the stage at 9 o'clock local time, I thought he handled himself really well. His 13 minutes, you get a sense of his introspection. You get a sense of his competitive wiring. You get a sense of his ability to kind of handle the stage and have that stage presence. And as you mentioned, I think you walk away saying, yeah, there's something there. And I can understand why that would connect with the Chicago Bears. I understand why that would connect with Ryan Poles specifically. And now you just have to continue to do your homework. But I think that him being able to lend his voice to some things that a lot of other people have been talking about him was an important part of the process.
Before we get to some of the specifics about what he said and how he said it, how would you describe the audience in terms of who was able to get questions in, how chaotic it was? I've been in those scrums, and it can be a mixture of chaos and people with agendas. But today, this morning, Friday morning, how would you describe what was surrounding Caleb Williams as he spoke?
Well, I mentioned that my arrival there was a little bit before 7 a.m. and already up at the foot of podium 4 were a bunch of people from Chicago. Obviously, Bears reporters were lining up early to get their chance to ask questions of Caleb Williams. That was, Mark Grody and Nick Moriano and Jason Leeser and Greg Braggs, and all of a sudden Patrick Finley, and you see the Chicago contingent kind of at the whole front of that session. Now, by the time Caleb spoke, it was probably 75, 80 deep with reporters gathered around him. You've been in that environment before. You know how much of a mob that can be. And Caleb comes up on the podium, David. I'm sure you've listened to it. And before he's able to say good morning, there's a question shouted from like 9 deep from someone that I've never met who basically asked him, are you afraid to compete here at the Combine? And is that why you're skipping out on medical examinations and on-field testing and some of these other things related to the Combine? And I think multiple times in that first question, he was asked if he was afraid. And I told Mark Grody, I said, it almost felt like a plant of some NFL team saying, see if you can rattle him right out of the gate. You're right. The conspiracy theorist, and you go, is that what this is? And I thought he handled that well. I think he explained himself really well, moved on. And then I thought the conversation was kind of far-ranging with the number of different things we got into with Caleb, and again, I think I think I counted 29 questions total, and I think 11 of them were Bears related. So that tells you a little bit about where this is at right now.
You mentioned Mark Grody. I think he asked the question pertaining to his height, and when it produced the answer about being similar in size and stature to Aaron Rodgers. When he answered that, Dan, Grody asked that, Caleb Williams responded, which I think for a lot of people had a different interpretation of. I thought he was being somewhat facetious and like, oh yeah, nobody's asked me that before type of way. And he's like, nobody's ever asked me that before. Was he kidding around? How did you interpret his answer? Because he said he was either 6'1", 6'2", and he was also 215 and similar in size to Aaron Rodgers.
So it didn't resonate with me in the moment, but I was alerted later that it had caused a little bit of a stir in certain pockets on whether he was being sincere or not. I've re-listened to it and watched the video of it, and I think there was probably a small element of sarcasm to it. It wasn't something I fixated on because, particularly after talking to all the people I've talked to in recent weeks about Caleb Williams, it's not a major concern for people inside the league. I think the people that have evaluated the tape see his size as something that is there, but like he has a way of compensating for it. He's got a way of buying himself time, of understanding the quarterback instincts that allow you to account for some of your limitations. We'll get the official measurements soon. We'll compare them to Aaron Rodgers' official measurements from 2 decades ago, and we'll go on from there. But I certainly didn't spend a lot of time thinking that he was openly trying to deceive the world or, doing anything nefarious to get away from that question.
All right, let's get to the things that do matter. Actually, some of the answers that were more relevant, and they pertain to begin with the Bears. You said there were 11 questions about the Bears. I think the answer about how he would feel if the Bears drafted him was interesting. So let's start with that. This is what Caleb Williams had to say about how it would feel playing for the Bears.
I mean, the Bears was an 8-9 team last year, I believe, and 7-10. Sorry, and that's pretty good for a team that has the first pick. And they got a good defense. They got good players on offense, and it's pretty exciting. If you could go into a situation like that.
Caleb circled the Bears in that game against Cleveland. He gave them credit for that win and said they were 8-9, and then had to be reminded that it was 7-10. There were a couple that got away from them.
I said on the radio on the Mully and Haugh show on Friday morning that he basically was saying that the Bears should have won 8 games. So he's already second guessing Flusy and blaming him for not being 8-9 rather than 7-10. But he does make a good point, Dan. All week I've been talking about, whether it was on the morning show or on television, the comparisons to the most recent one, C.J. Stroud. And I've asked the question about what if Caleb Williams can do for the Bears what C.J. Stroud did for the Texans. And that comparison to me is pretty apt. But what he pointed out today was a good reminder. C.J. Stroud was taking over a 3-14 football team. Yeah. Caleb Williams would not be. This is a team that is ascending, that has the second half of last season to point to as progress. And you don't see a lot of 7-10 football teams having the number 1 overall draft pick, because that implies that they're closer than they might be. I think that he said that in a way that it sounded like a bullet point. It sounded like something that his team reminded him to point out, because his team had decided, well, that's a pro about Chicago, and if the Bears pick you.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly allusion to the sturdy infrastructure that Ryan Poles keeps talking about, believing that they are in position to provide him with defensive support, believing that they're in position to be more competitive, and then he's just got to come in and do his thing. It's going to be kind of fascinating to see how that involves. You mentioned C.J. Stroud. I had a chance the other day, and I can't remember, this week's a blur if we talked about it previously, but I asked D'Amico Ryans, as a defensive-minded coach, how he went about setting up a healthy springboard for a rookie quarterback. And he talked about the importance of who's surrounding the quarterback. He talked about Bobby Slowick and Jared Johnson. He talked about Shane Day and Bill Lazor, by the way, Bill Lazor reference. He talked about Case Keenum as a group of people around CJ that truly gave him places to go for information, to go for support, to go to ask questions. And I think that when we talk about this with the Bears infrastructure, that's the next step of this, right? You have the football team and your X's and O's in the depth chart, but now you've got to get that connection piece put in with the people that are going to be all around your rookie quarterback, if it is Caleb Williams. And you got to make sure that clicks quickly, because that seemed to be the catalyst to everything that Houston did a year ago. If the Bears do even half of the improvement that the Houston Texans did this last season, we're going to be here a year from now dreaming really big dreams.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Caleb Williams dreams pretty big dreams, and he's a guy whose confidence is obvious, and he's in command of the podium, and he did that this Friday morning. I felt like it will maybe rub some people the wrong way. We talked about how in the Pete Thamel article he wanted to be great, and he talked about football immortality, and he had maybe the audacity in the eyes of some people to look at Walter Payton and mention Michael Jordan, and not to put himself in that company, but just talk about what's possible in Chicago if you are that good and people remember you that long. So in that context, he was pretty open on Friday morning in the Indy, talking about wanting to make history.
Whole lot of dominant quarterback play? No, not at all. I don't compare myself to the other guys. That's there or been there. I think I'm my own player, and I tend to like to create history and rewrite history.
Well, That wouldn't be as difficult to do in Chicago, Dan, as it might be in other places like Green Bay or San Francisco, but you do like the ambition.
Yeah, here's the pen, kid, right away. Like let's please rewrite this history because it's been a frustrating history for a long time, particularly in the last 35 years. And so he's got an opportunity here. I have zero problem with being bold with the way you talk and with the way you set your bar. Only requirement is that you back it up with investment. You have to be willing to put in the work. You have to be self-aware enough to understand the demands that go to even thinking about approaching the levels that Caleb Williams wants to get to. And so that's just got, all that talk's got to be backed up by personal investment and time and hard work and all those things. If he's willing to do that, then talk all you want, and then let's see what the results are.
History regards Sid Luckman as the best quarterback ever for the Bears, and that was a long time ago. And yet his name did come up on Friday morning, Dan. I don't know if you saw this, but it's worth pointing out. We have Mike Florio from ProFootballTalk.com as a regular Tuesday guest on the Mully and Haugh show. And all offseason long, even going back into as the season was bleeding into the offseason, he was pretty consistent in that the Bears should keep Justin Fields. They should trade the pick and build around Justin Fields. And on Friday morning, Caleb Williams was a guest for Chris Sims and Mike Florio on Pro Football Talk television. Shortly after that, Mike Florio posted this on Twitter, quote, "We just spent 10 minutes with Caleb Williams. Condolences to the Vikings, Lions, and Packers. This guy is the real deal, and the Bears will have their first franchise quarterback since Sid Luckman." I don't think he was being facetious. I do think that he was being sincere. It does seem like he was impressed. What did you make of that? And that was just one example of how impressive Caleb Williams was to some people today.
Well, me and Mike Florio always see eye to eye on everything. We're right in line with each other on most topics. What I would say, if you know Mike well enough, as you obviously do, talking to him regularly, he likes players who like to challenge a system that doesn't put players in advantageous situations and sees the NFL as a prime ground to challenge convention. And Caleb's obviously willing to do that. His decision to not submit to medical testing here is unique. His push to kind of try to get the Players Association and the league to re-examine how contracts are done is something that's at the forefront. So I think out of the gates, Mike Florio had a player on his stage that agrees with trying to challenge some of these things. That said, I think there is a lot to like about who Caleb Williams is as a kid, certainly a lot to like about who he is as a player. And you're going to get those sentiments popping up. Now, as well as I do, there's going to be pushback, and there's going to be other people that go, "Oh, this guy's, the next bust waiting to happen." I think this is a guy that as I prepare to leave Indy and point the car north, just feels like the guy you have to take. And he's going to be picked number 1 overall. He said that himself today. And if the Chicago Bears don't do it, I think most of the league is going to be shocked.
So we'll get into some of the other things that he got into, but there were certain questions he had to address. And I think number 1 might have been why he chose not to partake in the medical testing, which is what the original intent of the NFL Combine in Indianapolis was for, and why it was in Indianapolis. What did you make of the way that Caleb Williams answered that question about wanting to submit to medical testing for the teams that he visits, because those are the teams likely to draft him, but he did not want to submit to testing that would be available to all 32 teams? Maybe that was to protect his medical privacy. Maybe it's because it's part of this whole grander plan to be different and control his own agenda. Maybe it's a combination of both.
I would guess it's a combination of both, and I'm a little conflicted on it because, as we talked about in our last podcast, I just don't want the quest to be different to be the thing that drives Caleb Williams all the time. I want this quest to be great, to be the thing that drives him all the time. And so I just worry if you have too many of these things that you're challenging and pushing back on and trying to make a stance and trying to be, the pioneer or the trailblazer in certain regards, that it's going to take away from your fuel tank to do what your ultimate goal is, which is to become the next Michael Jordan or Walter Payton or Sid Luckman, And so, I'm a little bit conflicted in that regard because I think he's got the right intentions. I think in this specific regard, it's fine. He's going to go do the testing at whatever organizations he goes to visit. I just don't want that quest to be different, to be the thing that we're always talking about with Caleb Williams.
What answer did he provide, if any, Dan, that made you uncomfortable, if that's the right word, or just made you uneasy about either the way he answered it or what he said?
Yeah, I don't know that I have one. I have to go back through it and see, but there's nothing that jumps off the top of my head of a moment where I was like, "Ooh, didn't love that." I know there were some in the assembled media that felt there was a um, level of self assurance that one reporter described as borderline arrogance. I didn't pick up on that. I think that there's a self confidence there that's very real. I think the great ones have those types of things. We'll see how he's able to channel those things. I thought obviously the discussion about his display of emotions, crying with his mom after the loss to Washington, was the question that was going to come up today, and what was interested to hear how he answered that. And when you get into those topics, suddenly you start to get a little bit of meat and potatoes about the personality and the DNA that we've been talking about for a while without actually hearing from Caleb ourselves.
That was one of the more compelling answers about showing emotion. Everyone has seen the image of him with his mom at the game against Utah, I believe, or when
I
he,
think it was after Washington
I'm
game.
sorry, Washington game, when he was being consoled and he went into the stands and there was his mom. He, of course, was asked about that and talked about just showing emotion in general. And this is what he had to say.
There's not many people in the world that get to experience what I experience every game day, every practice day. So it kind of goes back to, it always kind of goes back to that for me. It's something that I only get to experience. It's something that I really care about, which is not only winning the game, but doing it with my teammates. And so every time we lose, I feel like I let my teammates down.
So, not a full explanation about what makes him so emotional, but it did invoke his teammates, which again seemed like it was, as often as he mentioned it, a talking point that was stressed to him to make sure that everyone understood that he was about his teammates first, winning his teammates, the kinds of things that make you a popular leader.
Right, no question. I think that was certainly something that was on the forefront of his mind, and comes across well. I think from the emotional standpoint that the passion tank is overflowing. And that is a plus until it's a minus. And so you're going to have to figure out how to work with that, and you're going to have to figure out how to work with that at the next level, where, as Caleb will quickly find out, every single thing he says and does is going to have a headline attached to it going forward. And you just better be prepared for that existence, because people are going to ask these questions every single week that you're a quarterback in the NFL, and they're going to examine your body language and your outwards displays of emotion every single week that you're in the NFL. And so you just have to find the right way to take what is something that is a huge part of who you are and push it in the right direction. I always tell the story of talking to people that knew Percy Harvin before he got into college. And there was, I think it was his high school track coach who said, "What makes you tick sometimes can make you talk." And I always love that expression, because it is like, sometimes your greatest strength can also become something that gets you into trouble. And you just have to have a way of balancing that.
Particularly if it is with the Bears and he comes to a team that will be playing its first game in 3 years without Justin Fields. And he was a very popular teammate to the point where guys like DJ Moore have, publicly endorsed him, even if it seems inevitable and imminent that he's going to be traded. So I think that's a really good point and way to put it. Your strength can't be your biggest weakness. And in Caleb Williams' case, that means when you come into the Bears locker room, you have to strike a balance between that confidence that allows you to not be phased by the moment, being a rookie starter on a team that has playoff aspirations, but you can't assume that you've already arrived. And that's a difficult balance for a lot of kids who are still kids at 22, young men, professional athletes, yes, but emotional maturity is much different. So I can see why people might come out of that today. I'm not being critical, just being honest, and wonder if he can do that. Does he have the humility that's also necessary to be a good leader?
Circling back on what you asked about maybe a question that threw me for a loop a little bit, I would say that when he kind of offered up the idea that he doesn't talk a lot and doesn't do a lot of things that he doesn't see as useful, right? Like he was sort of referencing having the story from ESPN's Pete Thamel that came out earlier in the week as a stage setter for what was going to happen this morning at the combine, as something that was, by his own admission, was calculated and sort of forward thinking in that regard. That was probably the one where I stopped myself for about 4 or 5 seconds and said, you better understand what Chicago is and what Chicago Bears football is, and that it's not going to be all up to you on when you do things and why you do things, right? Like you're going to have to play the NFL game a little bit. And if you don't, there's going to be backlash to that in ways that you'll have to get ready to deal with. So that, I mean, look, starting quarterbacks are obligated by league rules to talk every Wednesday, and they're obligated to talk after every game. Is Caleb Williams going to choose to be different in that regard and push back on that part of the system? And if so, you're the host of a morning sports talk radio show. I think your phone lines are going to light up if that's the case.
Well, they will, and I would tell everyone the same thing. I think it's a really good point. But if you're successful in a market like Chicago, then we all have been through experiences. I don't want to say we all have been. I have seen examples where if you are good enough and achieve a certain level of success in a sports mad town like Chicago is, you can manipulate the process. You can manage perception if you do it consistently well, and if you do it in a way that doesn't seem inconsistent with the rest of what's going on. You can't lose and fail and do that. If you win or are successful, you're going to have a lot of people that don't mind your manipulation. And I think that's what it is. And we saw, I think that's an interesting admission there, Dan, because I thought the same thing. Is like, okay, you strategically, or your team strategically targeted Wednesday at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock a.m. Eastern time, to drop the story with ESPN.com. You strategically agreed to talk to Pete Thamel, a reporter with whom he is very comfortable. And there was a degree of manipulation to that whole process. And I don't know that it bothered me as much as I thought it would, because this is somebody that is definitely potentially in a position where he does have the capability of playing well enough to where he will have the rules be different for him.
Well, I'll just say this. Mitch Trubisky asked for the TVs to be turned off at Haugh Hall, and it was a story for 9 days. Justin Fields used the word coaching, and, it exploded immediately. Those types of things become part of your existence. They can become part of your existence in a way that becomes exhausting to you as a player and a person. And the last thing you want with your franchise quarterback is for him to be exhausted from things that were self-created, and so I guess it's probably a reminder to the people at Haugh Hall that you better also have your team assembled to not be budged out of the way at every turn by his team. You know what? There's going to have to be a whole lot of merging of teams here for this to be a productive experience. There's a heavy lift to that, and you can run from it, and you can ignore it, or you can put it together and go from it. And they've got to decide how to do that.
Derrick Rose was enigmatic, and he was allowed to be when he was the MVP and leading the Bulls to Eastern Conference Finals and making them an NBA title contender. Sammy Sosa wasn't here for all of that, but the end of it, and he was definitely a guy who lived life on his terms, media life on his terms, and he got away with it. Why? Well, 66 home runs will help you do what you want to do. Frank Thomas over the years was the same type of thing. There are examples. I could tell you hockey examples with Patrick Kane and to a lesser degree Jonathan Toews. When you reach a certain level of celebrity, or you have achieved a certain level of success in Chicago, Boston, Philly, or whatever, and you're a professional athlete, you can dictate the terms of how you manage that perception and what you allow to come in and what you want to put out. So this is a good example today, Friday, that Caleb Williams might fall into that category one day, not too far in the future. And if he's good enough, though, if he beats the Packers with 3 touchdowns and 300 yards passing, and it's at Lambeau Field, okay, you talk when you want to talk, Caleb. We'll listen.
It'll be interesting to see where it goes. And I would say, look, like, just to tie a bow on this part of the conversation, I think, NFL teams are watching this session this morning, right? And they're trying to get an assessment of stage presence and poise of messaging. And I think for 13 minutes, Dyson fermented to determine and
You broke in and out there for a little bit at the end. I didn't hear the last part of what you said.
I was just saying, like, it's a challenge, right? Of trying to figure out how much of this
Right.
is pre-packaged and how much is genuine, and that's up to every team and everybody that encounters Caleb to try to solve that mystery and figure out what it is.
The last part of the press conference that I think is worth playing or revisiting is what he had to say about meeting with the Bears. We don't know if he played putt-putt or darts, unless you do, Dan. I don't know. Did he paint his fingernails? Were they painted this morning? I don't know if he was or wasn't. But we do know that he enjoyed his visit with the Bears. I think he called it awesome. And he met with Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, and he sounded like this, recalling that.
They were awesome. I spoke more about ball and things like that, just because the interviews are so short. So it was more about them getting to know me, getting to test my mental, what I know, the base things of what it takes to be a quarterback in the NFL.
Speed dating, and it worked.
No
he
doubt.
liked them. So, any
Yeah.
other insight into his meeting with the Bears?
Look, other than what I shared on the last episode, that I felt like there was an instant connection, I think it's just worth reiterating and emphasizing that this is just this icebreaker and the stage setter for what's to come. And you have to imagine that there's going to be several lengthy encounters here in the next 6 weeks that will teach each side about each other in a way that will be meaningful. Again, I thought it was neat to hear Caleb at the outset talk about some of the things that appeal to him about the Bears. Now he's got to go through a much more intimate process with them to try to forge those connections and feel like he's set up for success. Because I think when we talk about a guy that does seemingly have calculated goals, right? Like, part of that is making sure that you are set up for success. And I think that's been a lot of the conversation that's followed Caleb from his days as a high school player in Washington, D.C., with his college recruitment and his transfer and everything up to now. You just want to put yourself in the best possible position to get yourself to maximize what you have to give.
I was impressed. I really liked everything that I heard. I know that I'm having to tap the brakes. As Greg Cosell warned us on the Mully and Haugh show Friday morning after watching tape. He's like, all right, maybe not generational talent. All right, you might want to be careful. I think guys who watch tape as long as Greg Cosell has, you respect their point of view and opinion, and they don't get carried away often at all. I mean, we're in a different situation. I'm in a different situation. So I'm still not necessarily getting my brakes checked. I'm not worried if they're a little bit faulty, because I'm fine going at the speed. It's easy to get excited about Caleb Williams. I think you watch the tape, you hear him talk, and there's a lot to like there, Dan. And I think that I don't really care if he doesn't throw at the combine.
No, the combine. I mean, yeah, and he hit that one pretty much head on and said, "I've got 30 plus games of college tape. If you want to see how I compete and how I throw a football, get back up in your room and pull up the video." That I'm 100% in agreement with him there. There's nothing for him to show in that setting. But I'm assuming he'll throw at his pro day. March 20th is the date on that. And you know me, David, I'm I'm at the auto body shop monthly in this regard, checking my brakes, because I like them to be really firm in case we have to hit them.
Absolutely. Yep, I get it. I think that's fair, and you reserve. There's a lot of time left. I mean, we're sitting here on March 1st. The draft is at the end of April. We reserve the right to change our mind based on new evidence that's presented to the court of public opinion. That's fair and always the case. But on this day, it's easy for me to say that there were certain things that you needed to hear from Caleb Williams, and there are certain boxes he checked. The one thing that I think does kind of overarching thing that maybe I didn't hear, and I still have a degree, concern is too strong, but curiosity. I still want to know how large of a role, and I guess what it means for his father to be as involved as he will be. Does that mean contract negotiation? Does that mean wants input and being notified about game plans? Does that mean you're going to be hearing from Carl Williams every Monday or Tuesday on his chosen handpicked media outlet? I don't know, and that would concern me if I'm the Bears, because that's the one thing that I haven't been able to fully grasp from the public information in the public domain. But of all the things about Caleb Williams right now, because his dad plays such a large role in his life, that can be a great thing. But I want it to be a great thing, and it needs to stay that way for me to feel like it's fully not going to be a problem.
How much does the Pat McAfee show have to offer him to be the chosen mouthpiece of of where they go? Because whatever the chosen media outlet is that he will link up with, will have to pay a pretty price based on
Yep.
everything I've been told about some of the motivations behind the scenes. And I walked out of that convention center this morning thinking about Caleb Williams, that like his DNA appeals to me. Now, if you're the Bears and you're Ryan Poles, you have to figure out how to manage everything that's around him, and that seems to be the next step in this process. You can fall in love with the kid, and then you say, okay, like, how do we make sure that we have the rest of the equation managed properly in a way where we can do it gracefully and successfully? And that seems to be where I'm at walking out of here this week with that in mind. I also think that probably, David, the one answer to me that I enjoyed the most was, he had told the LA Times at the end of last season that he was going to reflect on the 2023 season as one of the most important in his football life. And I kind of followed up on that today. And I thought he was pretty introspective and self-aware of saying, like, look, it was an opportunity for me in my life to understand how to handle losing and to try to get my brain around the feelings and the energy I was feeling. He used those words, the feeling and the energy, and that Lincoln Riley sat him down for a meeting, I think in late October, and just kind of set him straight and pushed him in the right direction. And so I do think that was, a mature approach to a year that obviously tested him in ways he had never been tested in his football life before. You come off a Heisman Trophy winning season at USC, life feels grand, and it's a whole different scenario at the end of an 8-5 year when you didn't play as well as you thought you would, and all of a sudden the arrows of criticism start coming at you.
So this has been a special bonus Caleb Williams episode this week, the third pod that we have dropped because of the NFL Combine. Anything else happened today, Dan, worth mentioning? Anything else that we didn't cover?
So yeah, real quick. First of all, if you want more on Caleb Williams, my colleague Colleen Kane wrote a great recap of this morning's session at ChicagoTribune.com. I spent my day writing a little bit of a scene-setting piece about the 2 hours near Podium 4 this morning, which not only included Caleb Williams as the headliner, but we heard from Drake May, we heard from Jaden Daniels, we heard from Malik Neighbors. Rome Odunze spoke to podiums over, and it was a pretty entertaining morning for those guys that will hear their names called in the first 2 hours of the first night of the draft next month. My favorite moment, David, of the day, you get some zany questions in these environments. They're coming out, and people are getting asked if they think birds are real, this and that. Somebody asked Rome Odunze from Washington if he was capable of landing a plane in case of an emergency, if he could get up in the cockpit and land the plane safely. And without missing a beat, Rome Odunze said, absolutely not. We are going down. All souls have perished. And I just thought it was just a really, really good moment. I tweeted after that, after listening to the entirety of Rome Odunze talk, that if he's still on the board at number 9, he will one day be the Jeff Dickerson Good Guy Award winner at Hallis Hall for his involvement with the media, because he's very composed and into it, and you know me, I like the guys that are into it. Rome Odunze certainly seems to be into it.
That's good, and you got to know your limitations, right? It's a good guy that you have to know
right.
exactly what you're not going to be able to do, and if he can't fly a plane, he's not going to pretend or try, so he's not going to be something he's not. I think there's a lot to read into that answer. That's pretty funny. That's great. Anything else about the week that you want to mention before we go?
Exhausting week, as always, but it's always a productive week as well. It's an unbelievable environment down here. First of all, the city of Indianapolis deserves a round of applause every year for the way that they handle this week. Checked a lot of boxes as usual, and you come down here with 3 or 4 main ones that you want to get to, and it just fun, particularly this year, as we've talked about all week. The Bears are in the center of everything, and honestly, David, I think the last thing that I'll say as we get out of here is that I just have this feeling, and this will be for people that have taken shots at me over the years, that April 25th is going to go down as a direction-changing night, perhaps forever, for the Chicago Bears, because they're sitting on this golden opportunity with 2 picks in the top 10 in a class that has things that they want, including a franchise quarterback. And we're just there. We're on the runway. Not to go back to the plane analogy after talking about Rome Odunze. We're on the runway of something that could be spectacular, one way or another. But it does feel like if you're Ryan Poles, you have to feel pretty excited about what's ahead of you.
a great way to end it, and it's a great feeling to have, and well put. And he did a terrific job all week in Indy. So for Adam Sadzinski, our producer, Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune, I'm David Haugh. Thank you for listening to the Take the North podcast. You can get it on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast, and you can watch us on 670 The Score's YouTube page. We'll see you next week.
Great talk. See you out there.